Welcome back to Crime Stories for Sleep, where the shadows hold secrets and the night reveals truths that daylight conceals. Tonight we're checking into roadside motels, budget accommodations, and the temporary lodgings where travelers seek rest, but sometimes find terror instead. Asterisk, turn off your lights, put on your headphones, and join me as we explore 5 disturbing true motel horror stories that will make you think twice before pulling into that roadside inn when darkness falls. Story 1, Room 237, Rebecca Martinez, had been working the night desk at Desert Palms Motel for 3 years. Building expertise in the unique challenges of managing overnight operations at a budget accommodation facility that served a diverse and often desperate clientele. Located on a desolate stretch of highway between Phoenix and Tucson, the motel occupied a strategic position along one of the major transportation corridors connecting Arizona's 2 largest cities. But its isolation from urban amenities and law enforcement also made it a magnet for people seeking anonymity and temporary refuge from various life circumstances. The motel catered primarily to long-distance truckers making cross-country hauls, budget travelers who couldn't afford higher-end accommodations, construction workers following job opportunities across the Southwest, and people who needed accommodations without extensive paperwork or credit checks. The clientele also included individuals fleeing domestic violence situations, people experiencing homelessness who had managed to scrape together enough money for a night indoors, and occasionally fugitives or others who preferred to avoid establishments that required extensive identification or maintained detailed guest records. Rebecca had specifically chosen night desk work because the pay differential for overnight shifts helped support her educational goals and her responsibilities as a single mother. The job allowed her to attend community college classes during the day while her children were in school, and the relatively solitary nature of night work provided opportunities to study between guest services and administrative tasks. She approached the work with professionalism despite the challenging environment, understanding that many people who ended up at Desert Palms were dealing with difficult circumstances that deserved compassion rather than judgment. The Desert Palms Motel was a classic 1960s motor lodge that embodied the optimistic mid-century vision of American automotive travel. Single-story building, arranged in a horseshoe shape around a central courtyard that had once featured a swimming pool, landscaping, and recreational amenities for families traveling the expanding interstate highway system. By the time Rebecca began working there, the pool had been empty for years due to maintenance costs and liability concerns. The landscaping had given way to desert scrub and minimal care, and the neon sign that had once beckoned travelers with promises of comfort and convenience now flickered intermittently, creating an atmosphere more ominous than welcoming. The building's 36 rooms reflected the motel's decline from its original purpose as family-friendly accommodation to its current role as budget housing for people with limited options. The rooms were clean enough to meet basic health standards, and the locks and security systems worked properly. But the furnishings, carpeting, and amenities showed decades of hard use by transient occupants who had no investment in maintaining the property's condition. Rebecca took pride in her work and tried to ensure that guests felt secure during their stays, understanding that many people who ended up at Desert Palms were already dealing with significant stress, financial limitations, and personal crises that made their temporary housing situation even more challenging. She maintained professional standards in her interactions with all guests, regardless of their apparent circumstances, and worked to create an atmosphere of basic dignity and safety that allowed people to rest and regroup during difficult periods in their lives. The motel's layout was simple and efficient, designed for easy management and maintenance. Office and manager's apartment at the front of the property, providing security oversight of the entire facility. 2 wings of rooms extending back from the main building in a horseshoe configuration that allowed visual supervision of most room entrances from the central office area. Parking spaces were located directly in front of each room door, facilitating quick check-ins and check-outs and allowing guests to keep their vehicles under observation during their stays. Room numbers ran from 201 to 236, with the notable absence of room 213 due to superstitious guests who refused to stay in rooms with that number, and the practical business decision to avoid the hassles and lost revenue that resulted from guests demanding room changes based on numerical superstitions. The missing room number had become a standard accommodation in the budget motel industry, where guest satisfaction often depended more on addressing psychological comfort levels than on logical or efficient numbering systems. But there was one room that caused more operational problems than any superstition could explain: room 237. Located at the far end of the east wing, in the corner position, that should have made it one of the more desirable accommodations due to its distance from highway noise and relative privacy from other guest rooms. The room was clean, properly maintained according to all health and safety standards, and structurally identical to all the other accommodations at Desert Palms. The heating and air conditioning systems functioned properly, the plumbing worked reliably, and the electrical systems met current safety codes. Yet guests who stayed in room 237 frequently requested room changes during their stays, often in the middle of the night when alternative accommodations were limited and room changes created significant disruption to both the guests and the motel's operations. Many guests abandoned their stays entirely rather than spending a full night in room 237, forfeiting their room payments and seeking alternative accommodations at competing properties or sleeping in their vehicles rather than remaining in the room they had initially accepted. Rebecca had reviewed incident reports and guest complaints related to room 237, trying to identify patterns that might explain the recurring problems and allow management to address whatever issues were creating guest dissatisfaction. The complaints were consistently vague and difficult to verify. Guests reported feeling uncomfortable, sensing presences that shouldn't be there, experiencing temperature fluctuations that didn't correspond to thermostat settings, and hearing sounds that seemed to originate within the room, despite the absence of identifiable sources. Some guests reported vivid dreams or nightmares that seemed unusually realistic and emotionally disturbing, often involving themes of being trapped, pursued, or unable to breathe properly. Others described feeling watched or observed, even when they were alone in the room with all doors and windows securely locked. A few guests had reported seeing shadowy figures or experiencing the sensation that other people were present in the room. But investigations never revealed any evidence of unauthorized entry or security breaches. Rebecca had personally inspected room 237 numerous times, both during regular maintenance periods and in response to guest complaints. But she had never identified any physical problems that could account for the reports of unusual experiences. The room appeared normal in every respect, meeting all standards for cleanliness, safety, and basic comfort that guests should expect from budget motel accommodations. On the night of August 15th, Rebecca encountered something in room 237 that challenged everything she thought she knew about the motel, where she worked and the guests who had stayed there over the years. The evening had started normally. Rebecca checked in a truck driver who would be leaving before dawn, a traveling salesman who was a regular customer, and a young couple whose car had broken down and needed a place to stay while waiting for repairs. All 3 parties had been assigned rooms in the West Wing, leaving the East Wing mostly empty except for one long-term resident who rented room 224 by the month. Around 11:30 p.m., Rebecca received a call from room 237. This was unusual because the room was vacant. no guest had checked in, and housekeeping had cleaned and prepared the room that afternoon according to their standard procedures. "Front desk, this is Rebecca. How can I help you?" A woman's voice, sounding distressed and confused, came through the phone. "I need help. There's someone in my room, and I can't get them to leave." Rebecca checked her guest registry. Room 237 was definitely listed as vacant, with no reservation for that night. "Ma'am, I show room 237 as unoccupied tonight. Are you sure you're calling from that room?" "I'm in 237. I checked in this afternoon. There's a man in here who won't leave, and he's scaring me." Rebecca was confused but took the complaint seriously. Guest safety was her primary responsibility, regardless of what her records showed. "I'll be right there to check on the situation." Rebecca locked the front office and walked across the parking lot to room 237. The room was dark, with no cars parked in front and no signs of occupancy. She used her master key to open the door. The room was empty. Bed neatly made, bathroom clean, air conditioning set to standard temperature. No personal belongings, no signs that anyone had been in the room since housekeeping had finished their work. Rebecca checked the room thoroughly, including the bathroom, closet, and even under the bed. She tested the phone to make sure it was working properly and could connect to the front desk. Everything was normal except for one detail that bothered her. The room felt cold, much colder than it should have been given the air conditioning settings. Rebecca returned to the front office and called the phone in room 237 to test the connection. The phone rang, but no one answered. But as she was hanging up, her front desk phone rang again. "Front desk, this is Rebecca." The same woman's voice, now sounding more frightened. "Why didn't you help me? He's still here, and now there are more of them. Please, I need help." "Ma'am, I just checked room 237. There's no one there. The room is vacant. I'm looking right at them. There are 3 people in my room now, and they won't leave." Rebecca decided to investigate further. She walked back to room 237, this time bringing a flashlight and her cell phone. As she approached the room, she could see light coming from under the door and hear voices inside, multiple people, having a conversation. Rebecca used her master key and opened the door. The room was occupied. A woman in her 30s was sitting on the bed, looking terrified and pointing toward the bathroom area. Rebecca could see that the woman was alone in the room, but she was clearly convinced that other people were present. "Ma'am, my name is Rebecca. I'm the night manager. Are you okay?" The woman looked at Rebecca with relief. "Thank God you're here. Can you see them? They've been standing there watching me for hours." Rebecca looked toward where the woman was pointing. The bathroom area appeared empty. "I don't see anyone else in the room." "When did you check in?" "This afternoon. Around 2 p.m. I paid for 3 nights. But these people won't leave me alone." Rebecca was increasingly confused. Her records showed no one checked into room 237 that day, and the housekeeping staff had confirmed that the room was unoccupied when they cleaned it. But the woman clearly believed she was a legitimate guest, and she was obviously distressed by whatever she was experiencing. "What's your name?" Rebecca asked gently. "Sarah Chun. I'm driving to Los Angeles for a job interview. My confirmation number is 4A7B9. Rebecca checked her reservation system using the confirmation number. No record of a reservation for Sarah Chun or confirmation number 4A7B9. The last guest to stay in room 237 had been over a week earlier. "Sarah, I need you to come with me to the front office so we can sort this out." Sarah gathered what appeared to be personal belongings from the room and followed Rebecca back to the front office. But when they arrived, Sarah stopped at the office door and looked confused. "This isn't right," Sarah said. "This looks completely different from when I checked in. Where's the man who was working this afternoon?" Rebecca was the only person who worked at Desert Palms. The motel didn't have day staff. She worked 7 days a week, covering all shifts except for a few hours each morning when she could rest while the motel was locked. Sarah, I'm the only employee here. I've been working alone for 3 years. Sarah looked around the office with growing confusion. That's impossible. I definitely checked in this afternoon. The man at the desk gave me a key to room 237 and told me about the ice machine and the pool. Rebecca decided to call her manager, Carl Winston, who owned Desert Palms Motel and lived in the apartment attached to the office. Carl had owned the motel for 15 years and would know if there was some explanation for the confusion. Carl came to the office in his bathrobe, looking sleepy but concerned about the unusual situation. After hearing Rebecca's explanation and talking to Sarah, he asked to speak privately with Rebecca. Rebecca, describe this woman to me. Rebecca provided a detailed description of Sarah Chun, Asian American woman in her 30s. Shoulder-length black hair, wearing business clothes that looked like interview attire. Carl's face went pale. Rebecca, Sarah Chun was a guest here in 2019. She stayed in room 237 for one night while driving to Los Angeles for a job interview. She was found dead in her car the next morning. Carbon monoxide poisoning from a defective exhaust system. Rebecca felt a chill. Carl, I'm looking right at her. She's standing in our office. Carl looked toward where Rebecca was pointing. I don't see anyone there. Rebecca turned back toward where Sarah had been standing. The office was empty. No Sarah Chun, no business clothes, no personal belongings she had brought from room 237. Carl shared what he knew about the Sarah Chen incident. She had checked in on a Tuesday afternoon in July 2019. Seemed like a nice woman. Very polite, excited about her job interview. She was found the next morning in the parking lot by a trucker who was checking out early. The police investigation determined that her car's exhaust system had been damaged, probably by road debris, and carbon monoxide had leaked into the passenger compartment while she slept. After that incident, we started having problems with room 237. Guests would complain about feeling sick, seeing people who weren't there, or hearing voices. Most people requested room changes, and many left in the middle of the night. Rebecca worked at Desert Palms Motel for another 2 years, but she approached room 237 differently from that night forward. Several times each month, the phone in room 237 would ring the front desk, always with Sarah Chun's voice asking for help with intruders in her room. Rebecca learned to handle these calls with patience and compassion. She would walk to room 237, acknowledge Sarah's presence respectfully, and explain that she was safe now and didn't need to worry about the job interview anymore. Sometimes this seemed to provide comfort, and the calls would stop for several weeks. Carl eventually decided to take room 237 out of service, converting it to storage space rather than continuing to deal with the ongoing issues. But even after the room was no longer rented to guests, Rebecca occasionally received calls from the disconnected phone, always Sarah's voice, always asking for help. Other staff members who worked at Desert Palms over the years reported similar encounters with Sarah Chun. She was always polite, always concerned about the job interview she was traveling to attend, always unaware that she had died during her stay at the motel. Rebecca eventually left Desert Palms for a better position at a hotel in town. But she never forgot her encounters with Sarah Chun. She had learned that motels, perhaps more than any other type of accommodation, could become places where people's final journeys were interrupted, where dreams and plans were cut short, and where the spirits of travelers continued their journeys long after their physical travel had ended. Desert Palms Motel continued, operating for several more years before Carl sold the property to developers who demolished the building and constructed a chain restaurant. But during the demolition, workers reported finding personal belongings, in the walls of room 237 that appeared to be women's business clothes and interview materials, items that seemed much newer than the building's age would suggest. Sarah Chun never made it to her job interview in Los Angeles, but her presence at Desert Palms Motel served as a reminder that some journeys continue beyond death. Some destinations remain important even when they can no longer be reached, and some travelers never truly check out of the places where their dreams were interrupted. Story 2: The Midnight Guest. David Park had been managing the Crossroads Inn for 8 years, developing expertise in hospitality operations that combined business efficiency with the personal touch that distinguished independent motels from larger chain operations. Located at the strategic intersection of Interstate 10 and Highway 54 outside of El Paso, Texas, the motel occupied a crucial position along one of the most heavily traveled cross-country routes in the American transportation system, serving as a natural waypoint for travelers crossing between the eastern and western United States, as well as those traveling between the northern and southern regions of Texas and the broader Southwest. Unlike many budget motels that struggled with crime, maintenance issues, and negative reputations that drove away quality guests, Crossroads Inn had earned a solid reputation as a clean, safe, and professionally managed property that attracted families, business travelers, and long-distance drivers who appreciated reliable accommodations at reasonable prices. David had worked systematically to build this reputation through attention to detail, investment in property improvements, and staff training programs that emphasized guest service and safety. The motel's success reflected David's understanding that the budget accommodation market required balancing cost control with quality standards that met guest expectations and encouraged repeat business. Many travelers who stayed at Crossroads Inn were dealing with the stress and fatigue of long-distance trips, family emergencies, business travel on limited budgets, or relocation situations that made their accommodation needs more complex than simple overnight lodging. David took pride in running a professional operation that served this diverse clientele effectively. The motel had 48 rooms arranged in 2 parallel buildings, connected by a central office and lobby area that provided both operational efficiency and an attractive first impression for arriving guests. The architectural design reflected classic Southwest styling that honored the region's cultural heritage, while providing modern amenities and comfort levels that met contemporary traveler expectations. The rooms themselves had been regularly updated and improved during David's management tenure, with renovations that enhanced both aesthetic appeal and functional efficiency. New carpeting, updated bathrooms, improved heating and air conditioning systems, modern telecommunications capabilities, and enhanced security features had transformed Crossroads Inn from a basic budget motel into a property that competed effectively with more expensive accommodations by offering better value rather than rock-bottom prices. The motel's grounds were well-maintained and professionally landscaped, creating an atmosphere of care and attention to detail that reassured travelers about the quality of accommodations they could expect during their stays. David had invested in improved lighting throughout the property, both for aesthetic reasons and to enhance security for guests who arrived late at night or departed before dawn. David's management style emphasized personal attention to guest needs and maintaining high standards of cleanliness, safety, and professional service that distinguished Crossroads Inn from competitors who focused primarily on price competition. He had established relationships with local restaurants, service stations, and tourist attractions that allowed him to provide valuable recommendations and assistance to travelers who needed more than just a room for the night. The motel's location, at the intersection of Interstate 10 and Highway 54, made it a natural stopping point for travelers going in multiple directions, east-west traffic following the major transcontinental route, north-south travelers connecting with other highway systems, and regional traffic serving the El Paso metropolitan area and surrounding communities in Texas, New Mexico, and Mexico. David regularly served truck drivers, making cross-country runs who appreciated the motel's truck-friendly parking arrangements and the personal service that made their mandatory rest stops more comfortable and efficient. Families traveling to visit relatives chose Crossroads Inn because of its reputation for safety and cleanliness, particularly important when traveling with children and elderly passengers. Business travelers appreciated the reliable accommodations and telecommunications capabilities that allowed them to maintain productivity during extended trips. Tourist traffic represented another important market segment as travelers exploring the Southwest's natural and cultural attractions often used Crossroads Inn as a base for day trips to regional destinations or as an overnight stop during multi-day touring itineraries. David had developed extensive knowledge of regional attractions and could provide detailed information about hiking trails, historical sites, cultural events, and scenic drives that enhanced visitors' experiences in the area. The diversity of his clientele kept David's work interesting and challenging, requiring him to understand and respond to the varying needs of different types of travelers. Truck drivers needed efficient check-in procedures, secure parking, and early morning checkout capabilities. Families required clean, safe accommodations with amenities for children and elderly travelers. Business travelers expected reliable telecommunications, quiet rooms for rest and work, and professional service that supported their business objectives. David's success at Crossroads Inn had been built on his ability to provide personalized service while maintaining operational efficiency, creating an atmosphere where all types of travelers felt welcome and well-served. He had earned recognition from industry associations and travel organizations for his management excellence and commitment to guest satisfaction, establishing Crossroads Inn as a model for independent motel operations in the competitive hospitality market. But on the night of November 22nd, David encountered a guest situation that challenged everything he thought he knew about hospitality, management, and the people who stayed at his motel. The evening had been busy with travelers trying to reach their Thanksgiving destinations. David had checked in several families driving to holiday gatherings, business travelers trying to complete trips before the holiday weekend, and truck drivers making deliveries that needed to be completed before the holiday shutdown. By 10 p.m., the motel was nearly full, with only 3 rooms remaining available. Around midnight, David was working on paperwork in the office when a man in his 50s approached the front desk. He was well-dressed in business clothes, carrying a leather briefcase, and appeared to be a typical business traveler looking for accommodations. "Good evening," the man said politely. "I need a room for the night, something quiet if possible." David checked his availability. "I have 3 rooms left. I can put you in room 127, which is at the far end of the building away from the highway noise." "That sounds perfect. I'm driving to Dallas for an important meeting tomorrow morning." The man provided his identification, Robert Harrison from Phoenix, Arizona, and paid cash for one night's accommodation. David completed the registration process and provided keys to room 127, along with information about checkout time and local restaurants that would be open early for travelers leaving before dawn. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" David asked. "No, thank you. I just need to get some rest. It's been a very long day." David watched as Robert Harrison walked across the parking lot to room 127. Everything about the interaction had been completely normal. A routine late-night check-in with a polite, professional guest who seemed to know what he needed and appreciated efficient service. About 2 hours later, David received a call from the guest in room 128, which was adjacent to Robert Harrison's room. "Front desk, this is David. How can I help you?" A woman's voice, sounding concerned but not panicked. "I'm in room 128, and I'm hearing some disturbing sounds from the room next door." It sounds like someone might be in distress. David took guest concerns seriously, especially when they involved potential safety issues. What kind of sounds are you hearing? It sounds like someone crying or moaning, like they might be sick or hurt. It's been going on for about 30 minutes. David told the woman he would check on the situation and immediately walked to room 127. He knocked gently on the door. "Mr. Harrison? This is David from the front desk. Is everything okay?" No response from inside the room, but David could hear what the guest in 128 had described. Sounds that suggested someone was in distress. David knocked again, louder this time. "Mr. Harrison, I need to check on you. Are you okay?" Still no response, but the sounds of distress continued. David used his master key to open the door. Room 127 was empty. The bed hadn't been slept in. No personal belongings were visible, and there was no sign that Robert Harrison had ever entered the room. But David could still hear the sounds of someone crying or moaning. Even though the room was clearly unoccupied, David checked the bathroom, closet, and even looked under the bed. The room was definitely empty, but the sounds continued for several more minutes before gradually fading to silence. David returned to the front desk and reviewed Robert Harrison's registration information. The address in Phoenix appeared legitimate, but when David called the phone number Robert had provided, he reached a disconnected line. The identification Robert had shown during check-in had appeared genuine, but David hadn't made photocopies as he normally did for cash-paying guests. The next morning, David reviewed security camera footage from the parking lot. The cameras clearly showed Robert Harrison checking in at the front desk around midnight. But when David looked for footage of Harrison walking to room 127, he found something disturbing. The cameras showed Harrison walking across the parking lot, but he disappeared from view before reaching his room, as if he had simply vanished somewhere between the office and room 127. David decided to research the name Robert Harrison to see if he could find any additional information about his unusual guest. Using online search tools and public records databases, David discovered something that made his blood run cold. Robert Harrison had been a real person, a businessman from Phoenix, who had frequently traveled to Dallas for work. But according to newspaper archives, Robert Harrison had died in a car accident on November 22, 1995, exactly 28 years before his appearance at Crossroads Inn. The accident had occurred on Interstate 10, approximately 50 miles east of the motel, while Harrison was driving to Dallas for an important business meeting. According to the accident report, Harrison had fallen asleep at the wheel after driving for over 12 hours straight. His car had left the highway and rolled several times. Harrison had been found dead at the scene, still wearing business clothes and carrying a briefcase containing materials. For the Dallas meeting he would never attend. David realized that Robert Harrison had been trying to complete a journey that had been interrupted by death 28 years earlier. He had checked into Crossroads Inn to get the rest he needed before continuing to his important meeting in Dallas, not realizing that the meeting, the business, and his own life had ended decades ago. David continued managing Crossroads Inn, but he approached late-night check-ins differently from that night forward. On several occasions, usually around the anniversary of his death, Robert Harrison would appear at the front desk, requesting a room for the night. Before continuing to Dallas, David learned to handle these encounters with professional courtesy and compassion. He would check Robert into room 127, knowing that the room would be empty by morning, but that Robert's spirit seemed to find some comfort in the ritual of checking into a motel for rest before completing his journey. Other staff members at Crossroads Inn reported similar encounters with Robert Harrison over the years. He was always polite, always focused on his upcoming meeting in Dallas, always unaware that his business travel had ended decades earlier. David eventually shared Robert Harrison's story with other motel managers in the area and discovered that several properties had experienced similar encounters with travelers who had died on the highways but continued to seek accommodations for journeys they could no longer complete. The phenomenon seemed particularly common at motels located near accident sites or dangerous stretches of highway where fatigue-related crashes occurred regularly. David came to understand that motels served a unique role in these phantom encounters. They represented safety, rest, and temporary refuge for travelers whose journeys had been permanently interrupted. David managed Crossroads Inn for another 10 years before retiring and selling the property to a hotel chain that demolished the original buildings and constructed a modern facility. But during his final weeks at the motel, David made sure to brief the new owners about Robert Harrison and other phantom guests who might continue seeking accommodations. Some travelers never finish their journeys, David explained. They still need our help, even if they can't complete their trips. It's part of our responsibility as hospitality professionals to provide whatever comfort and service we can, regardless of the circumstances. The Robert Harrison encounters taught David that the hospitality industry serves more than just living travelers. It provides refuge and comfort to anyone who needs it, including those whose travels have been interrupted by death, but who still carry the human need for rest, safety, and dignity during their journeys. For David Park, managing a motel had meant more than just renting rooms and maintaining property. It meant serving as a guardian of travelers during their most vulnerable hours, providing comfort and safety to people far from home, and recognizing that some journeys continue long after the travelers have moved beyond the normal boundaries of life and death. Story 3. The long-term resident, Linda Rodriguez, had been working as head housekeeper at Budget Rest Motel for 6 years. Located on the outskirts of Bakersfield, California, the motel served a mixture of short-term travelers and long-term residents who rented rooms by the week or month. The long-term residents were typically people experiencing housing transitions, workers relocating for jobs, individuals dealing with financial difficulties, or people who preferred the flexibility of motel living over traditional apartment leases. Linda took pride in maintaining clean, comfortable rooms for all guests, regardless of how long they stayed. She understood that for many long-term residents, the motel room was their only home, and she worked to ensure that these guests felt respected and cared for during what were often difficult periods in their lives. Her housekeeping team cleaned long-term resident rooms weekly rather than daily, but Linda made sure that these guests received the same quality of service as short-term travelers. Budget Rest Motel was a single-story building with 32 rooms arranged in a rectangular layout around a central parking area. The motel had been built in the 1960s and showed its age, but the management company had invested in regular maintenance and updates that kept the property functional and safe. Room rates were affordable, making the motel accessible to people with limited financial resources, and the management policies were flexible enough to accommodate various living situations. Linda's work involved coordinating cleaning schedules for both transient and long-term guests, managing housekeeping supplies and equipment, and serving as a liaison between guests and management for maintenance issues or service requests. She had developed strong relationships with many of the long-term residents, understanding their individual needs and preferences, and often serving as an informal counselor and support person for guests dealing with challenging life circumstances. The long-term residents at Budget Rest represented a diverse community of people who had chosen or been forced to live in motel accommodations. Some were elderly individuals on fixed incomes who couldn't afford traditional apartments. Others were workers whose jobs required frequent relocation. Some were people recovering from divorces, job losses, or other major life disruptions. Linda treated all of these residents with dignity and respect, recognizing that everyone deserved quality living conditions, regardless of their housing situation. One of Linda's regular long-term residents was Margaret Walsh, an elderly woman in her 70s who had been living in room 15 for over 2 years. Margaret was a quiet, polite woman who kept to herself but always greeted Linda warmly during weekly housekeeping visits. She received Social Security checks that covered her room rent and basic living expenses, and she seemed to have made peace with motel living as a long-term arrangement. Margaret had moved to budget rest after her husband died, and she could no longer afford the mortgage on their family home. She had sold the house and used the proceeds to pay off debts, leaving her with Social Security as her only income. Motel living allowed her to have her own space without the responsibilities of property ownership or the financial burden of utility deposits and apartment lease requirements. Linda enjoyed her weekly conversations with Margaret, who shared stories about her late husband, their travels together, and the family she rarely saw anymore. Margaret maintained her room meticulously, requiring minimal housekeeping assistance, but she appreciated Linda's visits as opportunities for social contact with someone who treated her with kindness and respect. On the morning of September 14th, Linda encountered something in room 15 that challenged everything she thought she knew about her, long-term residence and the nature of life and death in motel communities. Linda knocked on the door of room 15 for her weekly housekeeping visit. Margaret usually answered immediately, welcoming Linda with a warm smile and offering coffee or tea while Linda cleaned. "Mrs. Walsh." "It's Linda. Time for housekeeping." No answer from inside the room. This was unusual for Margaret, who was always prompt in responding to Linda's arrival. Linda knocked again, louder this time. "Mrs. Walsh, are you okay?" Still no response. Linda used her master key to enter room 15. The room was neat and tidy, exactly as Margaret always kept it. But Margaret was not there. Linda checked the bathroom and closet, thinking Margaret might be in an area where she couldn't hear the door. The room was empty, but all of Margaret's belongings were in their usual places: clothing in the dresser, personal items on the nightstand, photographs of her late husband displayed throughout the room. Linda went to the front desk to ask the day manager, Tom Stevens, if he had seen Margaret Walsh that morning. "Tom, have you seen Mrs. Walsh from room 15? She's not in her room, but all her things are still there." Tom checked his records. "Linda, according to my files, Margaret Walsh checked out of room 15 3 weeks ago. The room has been vacant since then." Linda was confused. "That can't be right. I've been cleaning her room every week. I talked to her just last Tuesday." Tom showed Linda his occupancy records. Room 15 was indeed listed as vacant, with no guest registration since Margaret Walsh had checked out on August 24th. "Tom, I've been having conversations with Mrs. Walsh every week. She's been living in room 15 for 2 years. Linda, are you feeling okay? Maybe you should take the rest of the day off." Linda insisted that Tom accompany her back to room 15 to verify what she had seen. When they entered the room together, it was completely empty. No personal belongings, no photographs, no signs that anyone had been living there. "This is impossible," Linda said. "Last week this room was full of Mrs. Walsh's things. We had coffee together and talked about her grandchildren." Tom was patient but clearly concerned about Linda's mental state. "Linda, room 15 has been empty for 3 weeks. Housekeeping cleaned it after Mrs. Walsh checked out, and it's been ready for new guests since then." Linda was increasingly agitated. She knew what she had experienced, but the evidence contradicted her memories of recent conversations with Margaret Walsh. Where did Mrs. Walsh go when she checked out? Did she leave a forwarding address? Tom checked his records more carefully. "Linda, there's something you need to know. Margaret Walsh didn't check out voluntarily. She died in her sleep on August 24th. The coroner's office removed her body, and her family came to collect her belongings." Linda felt the world spinning around her. "That's impossible. I've been talking to her every week since then." Tom provided Linda with copies of the incident reports and documentation from Margaret's death. The records clearly showed that Margaret Walsh had passed away peacefully in room 15, was discovered by housekeeping staff during a routine visit, and had been removed by county coroner personnel after a brief investigation confirmed that she had died of natural causes related to her age and existing health conditions. "According to the paperwork, you were the one who found her body," Tom said gently. "You called 911 and stayed with her until the paramedics arrived, even though she was clearly deceased." Linda stared at the documents that contradicted her memories of recent weeks. According to the official records, she had found Margaret Walsh dead in room 15 and had been deeply affected by the discovery of someone she had come to consider a friend. "The family was very grateful for the kindness you had shown Mrs. Walsh during her time here," Tom continued. "They said she had often mentioned how much she appreciated your weekly visits and conversations." Linda took several days off work to process what she had learned, but she couldn't reconcile the official records with her clear memories of recent conversations with Margaret Walsh. She had vivid recollections of discussing current events, sharing stories, and maintaining the weekly routine that had characterized her relationship with Margaret during the previous 2 years. When Linda returned to work, she approached room 15 cautiously. The room was still vacant, still empty of Margaret's personal belongings. But when Linda entered the room to prepare it for new guests, she felt Margaret's presence strongly, the warmth, kindness, and gentle personality that had made their weekly visits so meaningful. Linda eventually came to understand that her grief over Margaret's death had created a psychological need to continue their friendship beyond the boundaries of death. The conversation she remembered having with Margaret after her death represented Linda's way of processing the loss of someone who had become important to her, but Linda also began to suspect that Margaret's spirit had actually been present during those conversations, that their friendship had continued in some form that transcended Margaret's physical death, and that the comfort and companionship they had provided each other during Margaret's lifetime had been too strong to be severed by death. Alone, Linda continued working at Budget Rest Motel for another 4 years, and she always maintained room 15 with special care, ensuring that it was clean, comfortable, and ready to provide a home for the next long-term resident who needed safe, affordable housing during a difficult period in their life. Other housekeeping staff occasionally reported sensing a presence in room 15, and several long-term residents who stayed in that room mentioned feeling welcomed and comforted, as if the room itself provided an atmosphere of kindness and understanding that helped them through their housing transitions. Linda eventually realized that her experience with Margaret Walsh had taught her important lessons about the nature of relationships formed in motel communities, the dignity and value of every person regardless of their housing situation, and the way that genuine human connections can transcend even death. Margaret Walsh had found in Budget Rest Motel not just affordable housing, but a community where she was valued and respected during the final years of her life. Her continuing presence in room 15 ensured that future residents would benefit from the same atmosphere of kindness and acceptance that had made her own stay there meaningful and comfortable. For Linda Rodriguez, housekeeping work had meant more than just cleaning rooms. It meant providing comfort and dignity to people during vulnerable periods in their lives, recognizing the humanity and worth of every guest, and understanding that some relationships formed in motel communities can become so meaningful that they persist beyond the normal boundaries of life and death. The long term residents at Budget Rest Motel taught Linda that motels serve as more than just temporary accommodations. They become communities where people support each other through difficult circumstances, where genuine friendships can develop between staff and guests, and where the human need for connection and belonging can be met even in the most transient of environments. Story 4. The Midnight Caller. James Thompson had been working night security at Roadway Inn for 4 years, building expertise in the specialized field of hospitality. Security that required combining law enforcement skills with customer service capabilities, and the ability to handle diverse emergency situations that could arise when people were far from home and dealing with the multiple stresses of long-distance travel. Located along Interstate 40 near Flagstaff, Arizona, the motel occupied a strategic position along one of the major cross-country routes connecting the eastern and western United States, serving travelers crossing the American Southwest as well as tourists visiting the Grand Canyon, Sedona, Monument Valley, and other iconic attractions in the Four Corners region. Night security work at a highway motel required constant vigilance, excellent customer service skills, and the ability to assess and respond to various emergency situations that could arise when people were traveling far from their normal support systems and familiar environments. Highway motels attracted extremely diverse clientele, and James had learned to quickly assess situations, provide appropriate assistance to travelers in distress, and maintain a safe environment for all guests while respecting their privacy and the wide range of circumstances that brought them to roadside accommodations. James appreciated the night security position because it utilized his background in law enforcement and emergency response while allowing him to work independently and help travelers during potentially vulnerable situations when they were most in need of professional assistance. His previous experience as a police officer had prepared him for many of the challenges of motel security work, but he had discovered that hospitality security required additional skills related to customer service, cultural sensitivity, and understanding the unique vulnerabilities that travelers face when they are far from home and dependent on strangers for basic safety and comfort. Roadway Inn was a well-maintained facility with 60 rooms arranged in 2 parallel buildings connected by a central lobby and office area that provided both operational efficiency and an attractive environment for guest services. The motel had been specifically designed to serve the heavy traffic along Interstate 40, one of the major transcontinental routes that connected cities from coast to coast and carried millions of travelers annually through the American Southwest. The guest demographics at Roadway Inn reflected the diversity of Interstate 40 traffic, families on vacation, traveling to visit relatives or explore national parks, and tourist attractions throughout the Southwest, business travelers attending meetings or conferences in Phoenix, Flagstaff, Albuquerque, and other regional business centers, truck drivers making long-haul deliveries across the country, and people relocating from one region to another who needed multiple nights of accommodation during extended cross-country moves. James's security responsibilities were extensive and varied, requiring him to monitor the property for criminal activity while also serving as the primary point of contact for guests experiencing various types of emergencies. He conducted regular patrols of the parking areas and exterior grounds, watching for suspicious activity, vehicle break-ins, vandalism, or other criminal behavior that targeted motels as opportunities for theft or more serious crimes. His customer service responsibilities included assisting guests with medical emergencies that occurred far from their normal healthcare providers, helping travelers deal with vehicle breakdowns that stranded them in unfamiliar locations, providing information and assistance during family conflicts that were intensified by travel stress and close quarters, and serving as liaison with local law enforcement, emergency services, and other community resources when guests needed assistance that exceeded the motel's capabilities. James's law enforcement background had prepared him for most criminal situations that arose during night shifts. But motel security also required understanding the unique challenges faced by travelers who were dealing with medical emergencies far from home, vehicle problems that threatened their ability to continue their journeys, family disputes that were exacerbated by travel fatigue and stress, and occasional encounters with fugitives or other criminal elements who targeted motels as temporary refuges or opportunities for criminal activity. The location along Interstate 40 made Roadway Inn a natural stopping point for travelers going in multiple directions. But it also meant that the motel occasionally dealt with more serious criminal activity than properties located in more settled residential or commercial areas. James had handled everything from domestic disputes between family members traveling together, drug-related incidents involving travelers carrying illegal substances across state lines, armed robberies targeting both the motel and individual guests, and fugitives attempting to hide in motel rooms while evading law enforcement agencies. His approach to security work emphasized de-escalation techniques that resolved conflicts without violence, guest safety protocols that protected innocent travelers from criminal activity or dangerous situations, and cooperation with local authorities when situations exceeded his authority to resolve independently. James understood that his primary responsibility was ensuring guest safety and maintaining a secure environment that allowed travelers to rest and recover during their journeys, while also protecting the motel's property and reputation. Most nights at Roadway Inn were routine, checking in late arrivals, handling minor maintenance issues, conducting security patrols, and providing assistance to guests who experienced problems during their stays. But the job also required remaining alert for suspicious activity and being prepared to respond to serious emergencies that could arise without warning. On the night of March 3rd, James encountered a situation that challenged everything he thought he knew about security work and the people who sought refuge at highway motels. During the darkest hours of the night, the evening had been quiet with typical late-night activity. James had checked in several truck drivers who would be leaving before dawn, a family whose travel plans had been delayed by vehicle problems, and a businessman who had decided to stop for the night rather than continue driving while fatigued. All guests had been assigned rooms and settled for the night without incident. Around 2:30 a.m., James received a call at the front desk. The caller ID showed the call was coming from room 234, which was located on the second floor of the East Building. Roadway Inn Security, this is James. How can I help you? A man's voice, sounding agitated and fearful. I need help. Someone's trying to break into my room. I can hear them outside my door. James took all security concerns seriously, especially those involving potential break-ins or threats to guest safety. Sir, I'm on my way to your location. Can you describe what you're hearing? Someone's trying to force the door open. I can hear them working on the lock. I think they have tools or something. Stay away from the door and don't open it for anyone. I'll be there in 2 minutes. James immediately left the front desk and proceeded to room 234. The second floor was accessible by exterior stairs located at each end of the building. James climbed the stairs to the East Building's second floor and walked along the exterior corridor toward room 234. The hallway was quiet and empty. No suspicious persons, no signs of attempted break-in, no sounds of anyone trying to force door locks. James reached room 234 and found the door secure with no evidence of tampering. James knocked gently on the door. Sir, this is James from security. I'm here to check on the situation you reported. No response from inside the room. James knocked again, louder this time. This is hotel security. I'm responding to your call about someone trying to break in. Still no response. James used his master key to open the door and check on the guests' welfare. Room 234 was empty. The bed hadn't been slept in, no personal belongings were visible, and there was no sign that anyone had registered for or occupied the room that night. James checked his guest registry using the security office computer. Room 234 was listed as vacant, with no guest registration for that night or the previous night. The last guest to occupy room 234 had checked out 3 days earlier. James was confused, but thorough in his investigation. He checked the adjacent rooms to see if a guest from another room might have mistakenly called from room 234's phone. But the neighboring rooms were occupied by guests who were sleeping peacefully and had not made any security calls. James tested the phone in room 234 to ensure it was functioning properly. The phone worked normally and could connect to the front desk. But as James was preparing to leave room 234, the front desk phone rang again. James returned to the office and answered. "Roadway Inn Security, this is James." The same man's voice, now sounding more desperate. "Where are you?" "They got the door open, and they're in my room now. I need help immediately." "Sir, I just checked room 234. The room is empty, and there's no sign of anyone trying to break in. I'm not in 234. I'm in room 247. They're inside my room, and I'm hiding in the bathroom." James checked his guest registry for room 247, like room 234. It was listed as vacant with no current guest registration. James proceeded to room 247, which was located at the far end of the second-floor corridor. As he approached the room, he could hear sounds from inside, muffled voices, movement. What sounded like a struggle or confrontation. James used his master key to enter room 247. The room was empty and showed no signs of occupancy or disturbance. But the sounds he had heard from the hallway continued for several seconds after he entered the room before gradually fading to silence. James conducted a thorough search of room 247, including the bathroom, closet, and balcony area. The room was definitely unoccupied, but James had clearly heard sounds that indicated multiple people and some kind of physical confrontation. James decided to research the history of rooms 234 and 247 to see if there might be some explanation for the unusual phone calls and phantom sounds. Using the motel's guest records and local police databases, James discovered something that made his blood run cold. In 1998, a guest named Michael Torres had been staying in room 247 when he was murdered during an armed robbery. Torres had called the front desk for help when the robbers broke into his room, but security response had been delayed due to a communication problem, and Torres had been killed before help arrived. The murder had been a traumatic incident for Roadway Inn and had led to significant upgrades in security systems and emergency response procedures. The killers had eventually been caught and convicted, but the incident remained a dark chapter in the motel's history. According to police reports, Michael Torres had made multiple calls to the front desk during the break-in, reporting that criminals were forcing his door and requesting immediate security assistance. The calls had been logged from both room 247 and room 234, suggesting that Torres had tried to call from multiple phones during his attempt to escape or hide from his attackers. James realized that he had been receiving phantom calls from Michael Torres, who was still trying to get security assistance for the robbery that had claimed his life over 25 years earlier. Torres was still calling for help, still hiding from attackers, still hoping that security would arrive in time to save him. James continued working night security at Roadway Inn, but he approached calls from rooms 234 and 247 differently from that night forward. Several times each year, usually during the anniversary month of the murder, Michael Torres would call for security assistance, and James would respond as if the emergency was current and real. James would proceed to the rooms. acknowledged Torres's presence respectfully, and explained that security was there to help and that he was safe now. Sometimes this seemed to provide comfort, and the phantom calls would stop for extended periods. James eventually shared Michael Torres's story with local law enforcement and motel management, leading to the establishment of a memorial plaque in the motel lobby honoring guests who had lost their lives during their stays. The memorial didn't provide details about specific incidents, but it acknowledged that motels sometimes became locations where people's journeys ended unexpectedly and tragically. Other security personnel who worked at Roadway Inn over the years reported similar encounters with phantom emergency calls from rooms 234 and 247. Calls always followed the same pattern: a man requesting help for a break-in, sounds of confrontation, and then silence. Current security protocols at Roadway Inn include procedures for handling phantom emergency calls with the same seriousness as real emergencies, recognizing that some guests may need security assistance that transcends the normal boundaries of time and mortality. James eventually left Roadway Inn for a position with a private security company, but he never forgot his encounters with Michael Torres. He had learned that security work sometimes involves protecting people whose need for safety and assistance extends beyond their physical lives, and that the commitment to helping others during emergencies can create obligations that persist even after the emergency has long since ended. For James Thompson, night security work had meant more than just preventing crime and responding to emergencies. It meant serving as a guardian for vulnerable people during their darkest hours, providing protection and assistance to anyone who needed it, and understanding that some calls for help echo across decades, still seeking the security response that never came in time. The phantom emergency calls taught James that the responsibility to protect and serve extends beyond the normal boundaries of employment, that some people continue to need help long after their immediate danger has passed, and that true security work involves responding to any call for assistance, regardless of when or from where it originates. Story 5. The Checkout That Never Came. Sandra Kim had been working the morning shift at Pine Valley Motel for 7 years, building expertise in front desk operations that required combining customer service excellence with the operational efficiency needed to manage checkout procedures, room turnover, and guest services during the busiest period of the motel's daily cycle. Located in a small town along Highway 101 in Northern California, the motel occupied a prime position in the heart of Redwood Country, serving as a gateway to some of the most spectacular natural landscapes in the United States and attracting a steady stream of tourists, nature enthusiasts, and travelers exploring the scenic Pacific Coast Highway. Pine Valley Motel served a diverse mixture of tourists visiting the ancient redwood forests that made the region famous, business travelers conducting affairs in the timber and tourism industries that formed the business economic foundation of the local community, and people making long-distance trips along the Pacific Coast who sought accommodations that offered both comfort and access to natural attractions that couldn't be experienced anywhere else in the world. Sandra enjoyed the morning shift because it allowed her to interact with guests during the most positive part of their travel experience, helping them conclude successful stays and continue their journeys with favorable impressions of their accommodations and the natural wonders they had come to explore. Most guests who stayed at Pine Valley Motel were satisfied with their experiences and genuinely appreciated the personal service that Sandra provided during the checkout process, often sharing stories of their adventures and expressing gratitude for recommendations that had enhanced their visits to the region. The morning shift also allowed Sandra to serve as an information resource for guests who were planning their ongoing travel, whether they were continuing north toward Oregon and Washington, heading south towards San Francisco and Los Angeles, or exploring the network of scenic highways and back roads that provided access to remote natural areas. Throughout Northern California, Pine Valley, Motel was a family-owned property that had been serving travelers for over 30 years, representing 3 generations of the Morrison family's commitment to providing quality accommodations and personal service in one of California's most beautiful and environmentally sensitive regions. The motel had 24 rooms arranged in a single-story, ill-shaped building with a central office and lobby area that reflected the rustic elegance and environmental consciousness that characterized the best of Northern California's hospitality industry. The property was meticulously well-maintained and offered amenities that specifically appealed to tourists and business travelers who were visiting the area for its natural beauty and outdoor recreation opportunities. Clean, comfortable rooms with locally crafted furnishings and artwork created an atmosphere that honored the region's natural and cultural heritage while providing modern conveniences and comfort levels that met contemporary traveler expectations. The complimentary breakfast featured locally sourced ingredients and reflected the area's commitment to sustainable agriculture and environmental stewardship. Local tourism information provided detailed guidance about hiking trails, scenic drives, wildlife viewing opportunities, and cultural attractions that allowed visitors to experience the full range of what the Redwood region had to offer. Sandra's work involved much more than just processing checkouts and managing room turnover. She served as an ambassador for the region and a resource for travelers who needed guidance about maximizing their experiences in one of America's most unique natural environments. Her extensive knowledge about local hiking trails allowed her to provide detailed recommendations based on guests' fitness levels, interests, and available time. She could recommend scenic drives that showcase different aspects of the redwood forest ecosystem, from the towering groves of ancient trees to the diverse wildlife habitats that supported everything from Roosevelt elk to migrating birds. Her familiarity with local restaurants allowed her to direct guests to establishments that specialized in regional cuisine and reflected the area's agricultural bounty and cultural traditions. Sandra had also developed relationships with local tour operators, equipment rental companies, and activity providers that enabled her to help guests access specialized experiences like guided nature walks, photography workshops, river rafting expeditions, and cultural programs that provided deeper understanding of the region's natural and human history. Her coordination with housekeeping ensured that rooms were prepared efficiently for new arrivals while maintaining the high standards of cleanliness and attention to detail that guests expected from a property that marketed itself as a gateway to one of the world's premier natural destinations. Sandra understood that guests' impressions of their accommodations influenced their overall experience of the region and their likelihood of returning for future visits or recommending Pine Valley Motel to other travelers. Sandra took particular pride in her ability to remember return guests and provide personalized service that enhanced their stays and demonstrated the motel's commitment to building long-term relationships with visitors who appreciated both the natural beauty of the Redwood region and the quality of accommodation and service that Pine Valley Motel provided. The motel's location in the heart of Redwood country made it exceptionally popular with tourists who were exploring the natural attractions of Northern California. But it also attracted photographers, naturalists, researchers, and other specialists who needed accommodations that provided easy access to the forests while offering the comfort and amenities required for extended stays during research projects or artistic endeavors. Many travelers had made Pine Valley Motel a regular stop during annual trips to the region, returning year after year to experience the changing seasons, document the forest's natural cycles, or simply reconnect with landscapes and experiences that had become meaningful, parts of their personal and spiritual lives. Sandra had developed friendly relationships with many of these repeat guests, people who had discovered that their annual pilgrimages to the redwood forests were enhanced by staying at a property where they were recognized, appreciated, and treated as valued members of an extended community rather than anonymous customers in a commercial transaction. One of Sandra's regular guests was Harold Brennan, a retired teacher in his 70s who visited the area every September to photograph the changing seasons in the redwood forests. Harold had been staying at Pine Valley Motel for over 10 years, always requesting the same room, always staying for exactly 1 week, and always sharing his photography with Sandra and other staff members who appreciated his artistic documentation of the local natural beauty. Harold was a quiet, polite guest who required minimal assistance, but always took time to chat with Sandra about his photography projects, the changes he observed in the forest over the years, and his travels to other natural areas throughout California and Oregon. Sandra looked forward to Harold's annual visits and had come to consider him a friend, rather than just a customer. Harold typically checked in on the first Sunday of September and checked out the following Sunday morning. His routine was consistent year after year: early morning hikes with his camera equipment, afternoons organizing and editing photographs, and evenings relaxing in his room while planning the next day's photography locations. On the morning of September 8th, Sandra encountered something related to Harold's annual visit that challenged everything she thought she knew about her regular guests and the nature of routine in the hospitality industry. Sandra was working at the front desk, processing checkouts for guests who were concluding weekend stays. Several families who had been visiting the redwood forests were settling their bills and loading their vehicles for return trips home. Business was steady but routine, with guests expressing satisfaction with their stays and appreciation for the service they had received. Around 9:30 a.m., Sandra noticed that Harold Brennan had not yet checked out of room 12, which was unusual for him. Harold was typically very punctual about checkout times and often arrived at the front desk early to settle his bill and discuss his photography discoveries from the previous week. Sandra called room 12 to check on Harold's status and see if he needed late checkout time or assistance with his departure preparations. "Mr. Brennan, this is Sandra at the front desk. I wanted to check on your checkout plans this morning." Harold's voice sounding exactly as Sandra remembered from previous years. "Good morning, Sandra. I'll be checking out in about 30 minutes. I'm just finishing packing my camera equipment." "That's perfect, Mr. Brennan. Take your time. I'll have your bill ready when you're prepared to check out." Sandra prepared Harold's bill, calculating the week-long stay at the rates they had discussed during his check-in. She also gathered the local tourism brochures that Harold liked to take with him for planning future trips to the area. An hour passed, and Harold had not appeared at the front desk for checkout. Sandra called room 12, again to see if he needed additional time or assistance. No answer from room 12. This was unusual for Harold, who was always responsive to phone calls and courteous about communication with hotel staff. Sandra decided to walk to room 12 and check on Harold's status in person. She knocked gently on the door. "Mr. Brennan? It's Sandra from the front desk. Are you ready for checkout assistance?" No response from inside the room. Sandra knocked again, louder this time. Concerned that Harold might have experienced a medical emergency or some other problem that prevented him from responding, Sandra used her master key to enter room 12. The room was empty. No personal belongings, no camera equipment, no signs that Harold had ever occupied the room during the previous week. Sandra was confused and concerned. She had clearly spoken with Harold by phone just 90 minutes earlier, and he had indicated that he was packing to check out. But the room showed no evidence of recent occupancy. Sandra returned to the front desk and reviewed the guest registration records for the previous week. According to her computer system, room 12 had been vacant for the entire week. No guest registration for Harold Brennan, no charges recorded, no record of anyone staying in that room. Sandra was increasingly worried about Harold's welfare. She had been expecting his annual visit, and his failure to appear was completely out of character for someone who had maintained the same travel routine for over 10 years. Sandra decided to call Harold's home phone number in Sacramento, which she had on file from previous year's registrations. The call reached an answering machine with Harold's voice, providing a greeting and requesting that callers leave messages. "Harold, this is Sandra from Pine Valley Motel. I'm concerned because you haven't checked in for your annual September visit, and I wanted to make sure you're okay. Please call me when you get this message." The next day, Sandra received a return call from Harold's daughter, Patricia Brennan. "Ms. Kim, this is Patricia Brennan, Harold's daughter. I received your message about my father's motel reservation. I was concerned because your father always visits us in September, and he hasn't checked in this year." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Ms. Kim, I'm afraid I have sad news. My father passed away last month. He had been battling cancer for several months, and he died peacefully at home on August 15th. Sandra felt the world spinning around her. "That can't be right. I spoke with him yesterday morning. He was staying in room 12 and was preparing to check out." "Miss Kim, that's impossible. My father died 3 weeks ago. We held his memorial service on August 20th. Sandra was devastated by the news of Harold's death, but she was also confused by her clear memory of conversations with him during the previous week. She had vivid recollections of his check-in, their discussions about his photography plans, and his phone call about checkout arrangements. Patricia provided Sandra with details about Harold's final months, including his determination to make one more photography trip to the redwood forests before his death, and his disappointment when his declining health made travel impossible. One of the last things he said was that he regretted not being able to make his annual trip to Pine Valley Motel this September. He had been looking forward to sharing his latest photography with you and the other staff members who had become like family to him over the years. Sandra eventually came to understand that her grief over Harold's death and her anticipation of his annual visit had created a psychological need to maintain their routine relationship. Beyond the boundaries of his death, her memories of his week-long stay represented her way of honoring their friendship and ensuring that his annual tradition continued, despite his passing. But Sandra also believed that Harold's spirit had actually completed his final photography trip to the redwood forests, staying at Pine Valley Motel one last time and sharing his artistic vision with the landscapes that had inspired him for over a decade. Sandra continued working at Pine Valley Motel for another 3 years, and she always maintained room 12 with special care during the first week of September, preparing it as if Harold might still arrive for his annual photography retreat. Other staff members occasionally reported sensing a presence in room 12 during September, and guests who stayed in that room often mentioned feeling inspired to explore the natural beauty of the redwood forests, as if the room itself contained an appreciation for photography and nature that enhanced their travel experiences. Sandra eventually realized that her relationship with Harold had taught her important lessons about the connections that can develop between hospitality professionals and regular guests, the significance of routine and tradition in people's lives, and the way that meaningful relationships can transcend even death. Harold Brennan had found in Pine Valley Motel not just accommodation for his annual trips, but a community where his artistic passion was appreciated and celebrated. His continuing presence during September ensured that the motel remained a place where creativity, natural beauty, and artistic expression were valued and supported. For Sandra Kim, front desk work had meant more than just processing registrations and checkouts. It meant providing a welcoming home away from home for travelers, recognizing and honoring the individual stories and passions that guests brought with them, and understanding that some relationships formed in the hospitality industry can become so meaningful that they persist beyond the normal boundaries of life and death. The regular guests at Pine Valley Motel taught Sandra that hotels and motels serve as more than just temporary accommodations. They become second homes for travelers who return year after year, places where friendships develop between staff and guests, and repositories of memories and traditions that give meaning and continuity to people's travel experiences. Harold's annual photography retreat had become legendary among both staff and other guests who had encountered him over the years. His passion for documenting the natural beauty of the redwood forests had inspired many other visitors to approach their own exploration of the region with greater attention to detail and deeper appreciation for the subtle changes that occurred throughout the seasons. Camera equipment that Harold carried with him represented decades of investment in pursuing artistic excellence, and his willingness to share his knowledge and techniques with other photography enthusiasts had created informal mentoring relationships that enriched the experiences of numerous amateur and professional photographers who visited the region. Sandra often remembered Harold's advice about the importance of patience in nature photography, his observations about the optimal lighting conditions for capturing different aspects of the forest ecosystem, and his insights about the historical and ecological significance of the landscapes he had documented over more than a decade of annual visits. His photographs had become part of the informal documentation of environmental changes in the redwood region, providing visual records of forest growth, seasonal variations, wildlife populations, and the impacts of climate change, tourism pressure, and conservation efforts on one of the world's most unique and fragile ecosystems. Week-long stays that Harold had maintained at Pine Valley Motel had also provided economic stability for the family-owned property during traditionally slower periods in the tourism calendar, and his consistent occupancy of the same room had allowed the motel to plan more effectively for maintenance schedules and revenue projections. Sandra's relationship with Harold had also taught her important lessons about the aging process and the ways that people adapt their travel and recreation activities to accommodate changing physical capabilities while maintaining their commitment to pursuits that provide meaning and joy in their lives. Harold's determination to continue his annual photography retreats despite the health challenges that eventually claimed his life demonstrated the powerful human need to maintain connections with places and activities that define personal identity and provide spiritual renewal. The motel industry, Sandra learned, serves people during some of the most meaningful experiences of their lives: vacations that create lifelong memories, business trips that advance careers, family reunions that strengthen relationships, and solo journeys that provide opportunities for personal reflection and growth. Her work at Pine Valley Motel had given her opportunities to witness and support these meaningful experiences, to serve as a facilitator for adventures and discoveries that guests would remember and value for the rest of their lives. The continuing presence that Harold seemed to maintain at Pine Valley Motel during September represented the persistence of artistic passion and love for natural beauty that transcended the limitations of physical existence, ensuring that the motel remained a place where creativity, appreciation for nature, and artistic expression were valued and supported. For Sandra Kim, 7 years of front desk work at Pine Valley Motel had provided insights into the profound connections that can develop between hospitality professionals and the guests they serve, the significance of routine and tradition in people's lives, and the ways that meaningful relationships formed in commercial settings can transcend the normal boundaries of business transactions. The hospitality industry, she had learned, serves fundamental human needs for shelter, safety, and connection that extend far beyond the simple provision of rooms and basic services. When hospitality professionals approach their work with genuine care for guest welfare and appreciation for the experiences they are helping to facilitate, their establishments become more than just businesses. They become communities where human connections flourish and memories are created that last lifetimes. Sandra's encounters with Harold Brennan had taught her that some relationships formed between staff and guests in the hospitality industry can become so meaningful and important that they persist even beyond death, creating legacies of friendship, artistic inspiration, and appreciation for natural beauty that continue to enrich the experiences of future guests and staff members. The annual September visits that Harold's spirit seemed to maintain at Pine Valley Motel served as reminders that the most successful hospitality operations are those that recognize and honor the individual stories, passions, and dreams that guests bring with them, creating environments where people feel valued not just as customers but as human beings whose experiences matter and whose presence contributes to the character and meaning of the establishment. Harold Brennan's legacy at Pine Valley Motel continues to inspire both staff and guests to approach their interactions with greater appreciation for the human connections that can develop in hospitality settings, the importance of supporting people's passions and creative pursuits, and the ways that commercial establishments can become repositories of memory, tradition, and meaning that enrich the lives of everyone who encounters them. The photography tradition that Harold established during his decade of annual visits has been continued by other guests who were inspired by his example and his willingness to share his knowledge and passion for documenting natural beauty. Pine Valley Motel has become known in photography circles as a place where serious artists can find not only convenient access to spectacular natural subjects, but also an atmosphere of support and appreciation for creative endeavors. The motel's walls now display selected photographs from Harold's collection, along with works by other guest photographers who have contributed to the ongoing documentation of the Redwood region's natural beauty and seasonal changes. These displays serve as inspiration for current guests and as memorials to the artistic vision and dedication that Harold brought to his annual retreats. Sandra Kim's experience with Harold Brennan and other regular guests at Pine Valley Motel taught her that the hospitality industry serves as more than a provider of temporary accommodations. It creates spaces where meaningful human experiences unfold, where relationships develop that can last lifetimes, and where the intersection of commercial service and personal care can create value that extends far beyond any monetary transaction. The front desk work that Sandra performed during her 7 years at Pine Valley Motel had provided her with opportunities to facilitate some of the most important experiences in people's lives, to serve as a supporting character in stories of adventure, discovery, creativity, and personal growth that guests carried with them long after their stays had ended. Her relationship with Harold and other regular guests had demonstrated that when hospitality professionals approach their work with genuine care for guest welfare and appreciation for the experiences they are helping to facilitate, they become part of extended communities that include Not only current guests and staff, but also the memories and spirits of those who have found meaning and joy in the establishment's services and atmosphere. The 5 stories you have heard tonight represent just a small sampling of the countless encounters that occur in motels across America, where travelers seek temporary refuge during journeys that can become permanent stays in ways that challenge our understanding of life, death, and the persistence of human needs and desires beyond physical existence. Motels occupy a unique position in American culture and the hospitality industry, serving as waypoints along the great network of highways that connect our communities and enable the mobility that has shaped our national character. They provide temporary homes for people during some of the most vulnerable and transitional periods of their lives, when they are far from familiar surroundings, dependent on strangers for basic safety and comfort, and dealing with the stresses and uncertainties that accompany travel. The staff who work in these establishments often witness the full spectrum of human experience, joy and sorrow, hope and despair, celebration and tragedy. They serve families on vacation, creating memories that will last lifetimes. Business travelers pursuing opportunities that will shape their careers. People fleeing dangerous situations seeking safety and new beginnings. And individuals facing personal crises who need temporary shelter while they regroup and plan their next steps. But sometimes, as tonight's stories have demonstrated, the people who seek shelter in motels find that their stays become permanent in ways that transcend the normal boundaries of registration periods and checkout times. Some guests discover that their journeys end at motel stops, but their presence in these establishments continues long after their physical travels have concluded. The motel staff who encounter these continuing presences learn to approach their work with deeper understanding of their role as guardians of temporary communities where human stories unfold in all their complexity. They come to recognize that their responsibilities extend beyond providing clean rooms and basic services to include serving as witnesses to the human experience in all its forms, including those forms that challenge our conventional understanding of life and death. These encounters teach hospitality professionals that their establishments serve as more than commercial enterprises. They become repositories of human experience, places where the most fundamental needs for shelter, safety, and dignity are met, and communities where relationships can develop that transcend the normal limitations of business transactions and even mortality itself. The travelers whose stories continue to unfold in motels across the country remind us that some journeys never truly end. Some needs for safety and comfort persist beyond physical existence, and some connections between people and places become so meaningful that they survive even the ultimate transition from life to whatever comes after. Tonight's stories from Desert Palms Motel, Crossroads Inn, Budget Rest Motel, Roadway Inn, and Pine Valley Motel represent thousands of similar encounters that occur throughout the American hospitality industry, where the living and the dead intersect in spaces designed to provide temporary refuge, but which sometimes become permanent homes for travelers whose journeys have been interrupted, but whose needs for shelter, dignity, and human connection continue beyond the normal boundaries of physical existence.